right, welcome back to the Word for the Valley podcast, and we've been listening to sermons taken from Pastor Mike's in-depth teaching through the book of Matthew. And in this section, Jesus challenges individuals on their religious practices, specifically addressing charitable deeds, prayer, and fasting. His command is, when you do these things, make sure they're done with the intention of pleasing your Heavenly Father rather than gaining the approval and praise of people. Let's listen to part 1 as Pastor Mike teaches more on this, beginning at chapter 6, verse 1.
So as we come to chapter 6, now we're about halfway into the Sermon on the Mount, and it's been pretty deep so far. And we're making this progression here as Jesus is giving us the standards of heaven, right? He had told us back in chapter 5, verse 19, that verse 20, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you're not even going to get into the kingdom of heaven. And then he goes on, he starts with that standard, right? He tells us that if you have anger in your heart unjustly due to towards somebody else, it's murder, right? And if you lust after a person in your heart, then it's adultery. That marriage is binding, that oaths are to be kept. And then goes on and talks about how we're to serve one another and to not allow insults and even injustice keep us from blessing and serving other people, and then ultimately even loving them. And concluding then in verse 48 with, you shall therefore be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is be perfect. So the moral standard, the relationship standard is obviously perfection. Well, as we come to chapter 6 here, we're looking at the religious standard. Things that within our religion, within our practice, and our relationship with God, the things that we do in this, that there's a standard in those things too. Which I think is really important for us to realize, just bottom line, that these things are not primarily for us. These things are primarily for God. When you give and you serve and you bless in these kinds of ways, charitable deeds is financial donations to people, or prayer, or even fasting, we don't do it for us. We do it for Him. That He's the audience, that He's the goal, that He's the purpose in these things. And to not measure these things based on how they make me feel or based on what I want to do or what kind of my approach to it, but to see it from His vantage point and handle it that way becomes imperative. Now, there's two things that he kind of lays out through all three of these things that I want to just take notice of right from the very beginning here in verse 2. He says, therefore, when you do a charitable deed, he does it again down in verse 5, verse 6, when you pray, verse 16, when you fast. These are things that Jesus assumes that we will be doing. These are not kind of in some ways optional. These are going to be regular practices in the life of anybody who takes seriously the things of God. That you are going to be giving, because if you're going to walk with Jesus at all, you're going to look like Jesus, and all Jesus did was give. You are also going to be praying. If you have a Father in heaven and you value that relationship at all, you're going to talk to Him. And so therefore you're going to be praying, and you're going to then be fasting, which is a separation from the things of the world, not just food. Obviously that's kind of implied there is the primary thing of fasting. But you're going to have to separate from the things of the world, at least to some degree, some temporal kind of breaks from television or from whatever, food, whatever. You're going to have to separate and fast from earthly things in an effort to grow to value spiritual things. These things are going to happen in the lives of a believer. So when these things happen. But then he takes notice in verses 1 of chapter 6, verse 1 of chapter 6, verse 5 of chapter 6, and then also then in verse 16, that these things are not to be done as a mere show. And one of the dichotomies that he draws within this section is that we need to make sure that our spiritual life, the things that we do in our religious practice, our relationship with God kinds of things, that we don't do that and measure them horizontally. That we're not doing them for response of people, but that we're doing them because it's what the Lord wants, because it's what He values, because it's what's important to Him. And this becomes especially challenging when we do particular kinds of religious duties, spiritual kinds of things, when we do them publicly. That the challenge to check our motivation, to check our heart, to make sure that we are actually doing them because the Lord's leading us in that, because it's what pleases God, versus that if I don't do it, I'm going to get pressure, or they're going to think of me in a particular kind of way. Jesus wants all of that to be cast out of our hearts and minds. That we do not do our spiritual deeds in an effort to be seen of men. All three of these things, he's going to challenge that as we move down through here. So, verse 1, take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men, again, with the motivation to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Now, one of the things you need to recognize here, and some people try to take this to such an extreme that it becomes almost impossible to give, is that if you do charitable deeds for somebody else, somebody is going to know about it, right? And that's okay. That's okay. Some people trip over themselves or maybe even limit themselves from giving at all because they don't want anybody to know. And if they can't figure out a way of doing it completely anonymously, they're not going to do it at all. And therefore, then they don't even do it. Right? Jesus did say back in chapter 5 that when you do your good deeds, people are going to recognize it and glorify your fathers in heaven when you do it the right way. That you are going to be seen of men. Now, but you don't do it for that reason. That's not the motivation. But it's going to be it's something that you're going to have to deal with. All right? He says, therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that you may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. And apparently during Jesus' day, the religious leaders and the people who kind of use these things for their own advancement, kind of societally, personally, they would make a big ostentatious show of their giving. Whether in the temple, before they put their coins into those brass containers that would rattle all the way down through. You ever been in church and the offering plate goes by? There's no padding on the bottom of that offering plate. There's nothing. And if you're the first one in, everybody knows those were dimes. Those were not even quarters. Those were dimes, right? And so somehow or another you gotta throw them in there and then jiggle the thing around a little bit and that was a lot kind of thing. That was a lot of giving, right? Well, the religious leaders, when they would go to the temple to give, sometimes they would announce their giving. They would blow a trumpet or do some type of ostentatious show and then put the coins down. Like that person at the grocery store who's changing out their coins for dollars, right? Have you ever been at the grocery store and you're just trying to talk to the cashier and somebody comes in with a jug? You can't even hold a conversation with the person like right over the counter with you anymore. And everybody knows in the whole store that person's walking out with $25 or whatever those pennies made it out to be, or kind of whatever thing, you know. Well, the religious leaders would do that because they wanted people to know that they were giving. They would even go on the street, blow a trumpet. And it was all under the show of getting the poor people to come to them. And then they would throw the coins out there. Some would hit the floor and the poor would kind of scrounge around for that. All in an effort to elevate themselves, to make themselves look better, feel better in some ways. Look what we're doing. Look how we're giving, right? Follow our example. This is what we're doing. This is what everybody should be doing. And setting themselves up in that kind of way. And Jesus says, don't do it. Actually, he says, that's hypocritical. He calls them hypocrites. And he does it in every issue here. Verse 5, also then down in verse 16. This is hypocritical. Now, most of the time when people use the word hypocrite, they think it's saying one thing and doing another thing. That is in some ways being hypocritical, but it's a very narrow definition of hypocritical. Essentially, biblically, hypocritical is to fake something. It's to wear a mask. Is to present something outwardly that is not true of what we are inwardly. To act, to pretend, to look more spiritual than we are. The only time we've given ever in the last 2 months is this 15 cents, but we make it look like that's all we ever do is give in these kinds of ways. And he says that's hypocritical. Don't do it. There's no reward in it at all. Here the hypocrites, they do this in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have, and a key phrase, glory from men. And assuredly I say to you, they have their reward. So if somehow or another they were able to get a bit of an applause, if they were able to get a bit of a reaction, hey, good job, you're spiritual, what a great spiritual person. If they got a little, that's all their reward they get. God's not going to reward them for it. That's all their reward. It's all of it. And the remarkable thing about the rewards that you get from humans, after a little while, you realize they really don't mean a whole lot. That people on one hand will tell you you're great, and then the very next sentence they'll tell you how awful you are. That the opinions of men is extremely fickle. that you can even get somewhat of an applause by blowing a trumpet on the streets and then throwing some coins down on the ground so the poor can scrounge out your feet to make you feel like you're a spiritual person. And some people will even think that you're great for doing so. And it's all false. You cannot live for the applause of people. You cannot live for the reward of other humans. If you do, you're going to be incredibly frustrated. Jesus instead says in verse 3, when you do your charitable deed, he says, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, which is really tough because your hands are connected with a head. You know, it's one thing if my hand was detached and then somebody else could take my hand and use my hand to give, but my hand happens to be attached to my head, which is then attached to my other hand, so therefore my one hand is going to know what my other hand is doing merely by being attached to the body in these kinds of ways. But his point is, like, go to whatever extreme to not make this public. Keep it secret. Keep it private. It doesn't have to be anonymous. It just doesn't have to be for show. Just keep this between you and me, God says. Keep this between you and me. Do what I'm asking you to do. And you do it between you and me. And then he says in verse 4, that your charitable deed may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly. Now, one of the reasons I think sometimes that the church gets such a bad rap for not helping, not doing more, is that the church, the genuine church, the true believers work really hard at being secret. They don't do it for show. Out in the world, somebody gets $25 and they're on the front page of the newspaper, the Rotary Club, and they got the whole thing. A big show, big to-do about it. In the church, somebody gives $25,000 and they don't talk about it a lick. They don't make a sound about it. It happens in secret. And so then one looks kind of more spectacular, looks more charitable maybe than the other, but it's not when it's functioning the right way. And the Lord, he wants us to do these things in secret. Now, in regards to money, giving, this becomes extremely tricky, does it not? How do you do fundraising within the church and not announce giving things on these kinds of ways, right? How do you not motivate for giving horizontally? How do you not pressure people? Hey, if you don't give, this doesn't survive. If you don't do this. And now where the response is not so much vertically, it's horizontal. I'm doing this to meet a need. I'm doing this because there's a demand. I'm doing this because there's pressure. I'm doing it all the wrong ways. And the Lord says, listen, if you fall into that, you're not going to get any reward at all. You have to learn how to cultivate the voice of God in the middle of all of that other noise. To do away with some of that pressure, to not care about looking like a stingy person. Or somebody who doesn't, you don't care at all. You didn't put any money in. I put a lot of money in. I just didn't tell you about it. And I'm not going to tell you about it, which I probably just did. But no more am I going to tell you about it, kind of thing, right? Like, you may even get like a negative backlash. There's this saying here, when reputation is more important than character, you're going to end up becoming a hypocrite. If your reputation is more important than your character, but if your character is more important than your reputation, you'll do what God wants you to do, and you don't care about what kind of response it gets from people. You and the Lord will know that you've done the right thing. Donor lists, giving contests, pledge cards. Pledge cards break like 3 of the different things on the Sermon on the Mount, by the way. I'll get into it. Fundraising efforts, pressure, right? This type of solicitation. It just shouldn't happen. Not within the body of Christ. And so therefore he says, rather instead, if you just do this in secret, your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly. Someday in heaven before the Lord, you'll get your reward. Now, verse 5, when you pray, he says, and when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites. So apparently hypocrites pray, right? Why would a hypocrite pray? Because they think that somehow or another by praying, they look more spiritual, that they're going to get some type of response or applause by the people that they're praying in front of. And so hypocrites pray. He says, don't be like them. He says, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. These individuals actually love, he says, they love to pray in public places. Their prayer life publicly exceeds their prayer life privately. If you pray more in public than you do in private, you're a hypocrite. That's what he's saying. If you value public more than you value private, you're doing it for show. He says, don't do this. This is what they like to do. They actually love it, he says. They stand on the synagogues and the corners that they may be seen by men. He says, well, fine then, I say to you, they have their reward. Which isn't a whole lot, by the way. Again, it's coming from humans. But if we're praying, much rather would we get a response from God than to get a response from people. I would much rather God move on a prayer even just a little bit than to say a lot of prayers that people respond to. Because when God starts to act on prayers, when he starts to move and his will is starting to get done, you're touching heaven, heaven is touching earth. That's no human, there's nothing else you can do that overwhelms that or matches that in any way. Now, but he says, contrast for those of us who want to do this the right way. He says, but you, when you pray, go into your room. It's literally storeroom, right? It's somewhere where you would keep your extra stuff. In these societies, they didn't have big closets. They didn't have they actually didn't even have big rooms, right? This would be a corner of the barn where all the stuff goes and you can kind of fit yourself in there with all your gear. Or for us, maybe it's your garage or somewhere you got to just keep garbage or stuff. Not garbage. It's very important stuff. Where you keep it, The basement. We got water in our basement on Wednesday, and I said to Julie when we were mopping it out, I said, Julie, stuff has got to go. I want less stuff, kind of. I just don't want to clean it anymore, right? But it'd be in a place like that where you could just kind of store stuff, right? That's where you would go and you would pray. He says, find this place, this room. And when you shut your door, pray to your Father, look, who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. And what he's encouraging here is he's not encouraging, and I've heard people do this, right? They have an hour of prayer and they have a quiet place, and like life shuts down for them to go to this closet space to pray, when everybody in the house knows exactly what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how spiritual they are for doing it. It goes against what he's talking about here. This is not to be an ostentatious show. It's not to be a legalism. It's not to be a thing that somehow or another you get some type of applause of people for being so very spiritual. What this is supposed to be is you're supposed to find an undistracted place. A secret place where nobody else is going to interrupt you. So that your prayers can be vertical and not so much horizontal. You're not worried about people overhearing you. So that you somehow reframe your prayer so that, whatever they're dealing with, somehow you're going to end up praying about that, kind of thing. Because you know that somebody's listening in. This is a place where it's just you and God. For me, my closet, so to speak, my secret place is I go for a walk. I have a little couple block walk around the house. Over here, this is a perfect spot. Afternoons, if I start to get into a space and I just need me and God time or whatever, just go out for a little walk and I can just talk to the Lord. I can listen, right? Because I haven't figured out how to text and walk at the same time. And I don't take my phone and go out there on the corner and text. So if all the news and the activity and the stuff, I just leave it here and I just go for a walk. When I come back, then I make all the stuff I need to do to catch up on all of the business of things, right? Just go out, easy to listen, it's undistracted. By and large, people in this neighborhood leave you alone. And you can get a walk in, you can listen to the Lord, and that's the way this is supposed to be. Not public, private. Public prayers have a tendency of becoming something that the Lord does not want them to be. Just because we have this nature. This is one of those really tricky, catchy things, right? If you're praying with a group of people and you realize somebody's praying and they start out probably the right way, right? And then they end up going the other way. Somehow or another, as they were talking to God, it was first person, but then eventually it goes to third person with God, and now it's first person with the people. They have gone from praying to talking. They don't even know that they did it. They're not even aware that the transition, because probably the struggle to keep God at the center viewpoint in a public prayer is so difficult that they get distracted by what's on the horizontal and they merge back and forth between the two, right? Oftentimes, prayers in group settings can become gossip prayers, where somehow or another we end up sharing needs and situations that God is very aware of, but somehow or another we felt like the people that we were praying with, we felt like they needed to be aware of it too. One of the things I'll tell people a lot of times in our prayer gatherings and stuff, I say, listen, if something comes into your heart that the Lord wants you to pray for it. I said, if we have no idea what you're talking about, please don't stop what you're talking to God about to tell us. We'll figure it out later. And we're not, because the Lord knows, and he should be the one that we're talking to. But oftentimes can devolve into something very different. Preachers are known from turning public prayers into preaching prayers, where they'll take the message that they just shared, right, the thing they just preached, and now all of a sudden in the prayer, they double down on it and drive it home with a sledgehammer. Dear God, please make all these people do that, kind of thing. And it's really not about God here that much at all. It's really very much trying to just continue to preach. And I will tell you this, if you are not nourishing or valuing private prayer, your public prayer will reveal you, because you'll do it the wrong way. And you'll do it more for the applause of people than you'll do it for the Lord. You have to train yourself in private prayer to talk and hear from God, so that in public prayer you don't get distracted by people. And you also have to learn to not much care about the people that you're praying with. Just know that you're all walking into the throne room together, and they're next to you, but you don't need to look at them at all. You just talk to God, and the people will figure it out. And so prayer here, right? Now he says in verse 7, and when you pray, do not use vain repetitions. Vain is empty or meaningless. Repetitions are babblings, right? Do not use vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think that they will be heard. Look, for their many words. Just take notice again. Hypocrites pray, heathen pray. Right? Not all prayer is equal, because not all prayers are actually given to God. It's partly what he's talking about here. Prayers that are done for people's sake are relatively meaningless. Prayers that are done for God's sake, spoken to the Lord and allowed to be responded of by God, right? Those are the prayers that actually mean something. But here, the heathen pray, and actually as a part of their kind of thing to make up for what they know is lacking in their own relationship with God, is that they turn prayer into something that it's really not supposed to be at all. Right? There's some people, they can't pray unless they start to get energetically hyped. And somehow or another, they think fervent means, the effectual fervent prayer, they think that fervent means like they're jacked up. When fervent literally means bubbling from the inside, it means that you're speaking something that is coming from your heart, not something that's coming from your emotions, not something that you are saying more vehemently than other people to say how important this prayer is to you, these kinds of things, right? Some people, when they pray, they merge into King James, which is, if you memorize the Bible that way, it's your fault. Or whatever kind of thing. And you want to, but somehow or another that God is heard if we use different kinds of language or repetition or emotion. And he actually says these are heathen examples, to make sure that we don't turn our prayers into vain repetitions. Now, it's okay to pray more than once for a need. Jesus did in the Garden of Gethsemane. Paul did regarding the thorn of his flesh. It's okay to pray more than once. Just make sure that each time you pray, you actually mean what you're praying, and you're not just doubling down on the prayer in an effort to get God to do something for you because you prayed about it a lot of times. I've had many times in my life where the Lord just says, stop it. I heard you already. Leave me alone. I'll take care of it. Move on to something else. I just kind of, and we go, oh, God. I somehow feel like in some ways, my prayer isn't meaningful unless I really am worried about it. I confuse care for effectual fervent prayer of the righteous man. And I think prayer, if I'm not all stressed out about it, then I'm not praying. God's like, knock it off. I don't want to talk to you every time you're all wigged out. I'm going to talk to you some normal times too. That 3 or 4 minutes a day that you actually have where you're normal. I want to talk to you then too, right? Kind of thing. Like, we don't have to turn it into this. Now, this is easy pickings, right? In some places, the Our Fathers and the Hail Marys. Say 35 of those. Okay. for what? It's penance. Whatever, just repetition. It's vain. Some people turn the very prayer that Jesus gives us in here, and this is the model prayer, turn that into a vain repetition as well. Where you can say it without even meaning any of it. You can say it without even thinking about what you're even saying. Our Father in heaven, yep, boom, and then you're moving, okay, good, right, like it did something. I think one of the things we ought to think about in these regards is vain repetition in regards to worship. Praise. Praise and worship in the setting of the church is supposed to be for prayer, right? But there are some people that don't believe that they can get into a worship song until they've sang that verse like 900 times. And they're actually doing it in an effort to kind of get the crowd going, right? Okay, the first time, they're just figuring it out. The second time, now they know we're serious. The third time, come on. And then you get people from the front that are encouraging, like, come on, sing it out to God. I just wasn't singing it out to you. I was singing it out to God. I meant it both times we sang it. And by the 5th time, I'm a little bit tired of saying the same words over and over again. But you're kicking the drum here. You're kind of pushing something. And it's very, very dangerous. I am vehemently opposed to any type of analyzation of the sound of the congregation in singing during worship. I'm opposed to analyzing that even one little bit. And I hear it all of the time after a worship set. Somebody comes up, oh, that was really great singing. Knock it off. Because now all of a sudden, you're getting people to think about it horizontally, and it really wasn't for you at all. I love that. That made me feel really good. Knock it off. This is prayer. And sometimes in prayer, it should sound really, really bad. Because if you're broken and crying and you're doing business with the Lord, you may not be able to articulate that song the way that you could if your breathing was corrected. But in those ways, God actually sees your heart. And that prayer actually means more, even though it sounded bad, right? So praise and worship, vain repetitions in that context as well. They think they'll be heard for their many words, for their repetitions. So in verse 8, he says, therefore, do not be like them, for your Father, look, your Father knows the things you have need of before you ask him. Have you ever caught yourself in prayer informing God on news that you didn't think he knew? Dear God, I'm praying for Aunt Evangeline. Oh, you know, the aunt on my mother's side, she married Joe, and she's got this toe issue. You know, like you're informing God on all of the details of the things that he knows more than you do. He says, don't do that. Your Father actually knows the things that you have need of. He says he knows them before you can even ask him. Just keep this simple. Right? As any child of God, a son or a daughter, don't turn it into some ostentatious religious show. Just talk to God the way that your child would talk to you. And you and God just relate. Talk to God, listen to God, obey God, and your prayer will be effective.
All right, we learned that God wants us to follow these religious practices without hypocrisy, that we're to be motivated by God's will rather than a desire to impress others, in contrast to the religious leaders who desired recognition and attention. Now, Jesus wasn't saying that people shouldn't see these practices, but he was saying that we shouldn't start them just to get attention. All right, that's all for now. Thanks for listening to the Word for the Valley podcast. So long, everyone.